It's Holly Dunaway. Are you into horror? Well, I'm not. But I'm going to read a horror book to you today. I've got a friend who wrote this named Oscar Calderon, and it's called Thief. And apparently it's pretty graphic. I haven't watched TV in at least 3 years, so I am not desensitized to any of this stuff. And I did not read this ahead of time. So you're gonna go through this with me. We're just gonna read like a chapter of it, and then I'm supposed to go to like chapter 20 and read that too, because I don't know if it's like really gross or supposed to be really good. So yeah, this is what the book looks like. Oscar Calderon, Thief. Can you see it? All right, let's get started. Starting with chapter 1. Oh gosh, get ready. Oh, it's not real, it's not real, it's not real. This is for me. All right. Before the end, but after the beginning. It was already past 5 and Samuel Sempero was getting anxious. The woman should have arrived an hour ago, just as she had done every day since he started watching her. The first floor layout was engraved in his memory. By now, he could have found each piece of furniture, each painting, and each stuffed animal with his eyes closed. The curtains were shut in the den where he waited, so no curious eyes would be able to spot him from the outside. The smell of incense and diluted in the background of his senses, he had no longer registered it. Fresh candles stood on the center of the table at which he had sat 3 weeks ago. His mother had been with him, and they had entered through the front door that day. Today, he had lockpicked the rear entrance. Samuel still found it surprising that his own mother had been able to convince him to come here in the first place. And yet, here he was again, seeking more answers. But the woman was late. Was she aware of him? Could she have known of his presence and decided to stay away? Did she possess that skill too? Samuel rose from his chair and took a deep breath as he delved into his blazer's pocket. The weight of the figure he pulled out was enough to put him at ease. He gazed at the empty eyes of death. The metallic shroud sparkled as he brought the statue closer to his face. It was grinning, therefore nothing could be wrong. Whatever power that woman wielded was no match for Samuel's protector. His doubts had dispelled when he put his amulet back in his pocket, but still there was no sign of the woman. A watch outside would have been useful, but he had decided to do this alone. Jake was his son, his responsibility, boss and father, and this was just a woman so far. Waiting wasn't the problem, for Samuel had done it many times in similar circumstances with similar purposes. Back in the day, when he was starting, he would wait for days, even a week, until his prey approached to drink. For the last time in his life, the instinct was still there, and his senses had not dulled. But unlike in those days, this time there were feelings involved. This time was personal, and that unsettled him. The muffled noises of brakes came from the driveway. The sound of an engine dying drew a smirk on his face. A car door slammed as Samuel took his position. By the moment he heard the key sliding into the lock, all the unwanted emotions had vanished. He knew what he had to do, and he was going to do it. The door swung open, and the woman, Farantina was her name, or at least she went by it, entered the house. From behind a massive bookcase, Samuel had a partial view of the foyer, which was enough to see the woman take off her sunglasses, put them on the console table, along with her purse. A multitude of black flowers scattered and on the waving fabric of her otherwise white summer dress, creating the illusion of the breeze blowing over a monochromatic garden. Samuel had found her attractive from the day he met her. She must have been a little older than him, probably in her mid-40s, but her slender body still looked firm but graceful. Her manicured hands had caught his eye the day of the session. Though she scarcely had shown it, her white smile was seductive. The low neckline had obviously been calculated move by her to show off her breasts and keep her male clientele happily regarded of the outcome of the meeting. With soft and cadenced steps, Fiorentina slipped in from the frame of his vision. Samuel snuck after her. He watched her from behind as she crossed the great room towards the liquor cabinet on the far end. Her hand ended short from the knob. By the way, she flinched. Samuel knew she had seen him. It must have been his reflection in the cabinet glass that gave him away. But then, he was already between the woman and the door. Fiorentina turned around and found Samuel's dark eyes. She stood where he had expected her to. From that place, there was no way out but through him. The shock on the woman's face melted into a frown. "Don't scream," Samuel said. She didn't scream. She didn't say anything as her eyes roamed the great room in evident incomprehension until she finally met his gaze. "What are you doing here, Mr. Sampero? Don't you know? Can't you see with your powers? Can't you even guess? What do you want?" Looking away, Samuel wandered toward her. A wary smile twisted his face. "What do I want?" As he approached her, Fiorentina straightened and raised her chin. Her bravado amused him. He wasn't particularly tall or burly. His face was shaved and scarless. Even his business casual attire didn't look very impressive. His semblance alone wouldn't have granted the respect he had gained through the years. But the woman's eyes brimmed with fear in spite of her shaky impassiveness. And Samuel knew that she could see what underlay his appearance. He stood before her, uncomfortably close, their eyes almost at the same level. "Madame Fiorentina, I have a complaint about your services." Her expression changed. Not all the fear dispelled, but the angle of her perplexity seemed to shift. "Oh, is that so?" she said. "Well, you know, there are no guarantees in this business. However, that day you and your mother seemed pleased. What changed?" She turned around and padded to the cabinet. From it, she took a bottle of bourbon and poured some into a glass. "Would you like a drink?" Her forced nonchalance didn't deceive Samuel, but in total control, he saw no need to rush. "No, thank you," he responded. "Madame Fiorentina, I have to say, before that day, I didn't believe in these kinds of things." His hands in his pockets. Samuel gave her some space. "I mean, I'm a man of faith, a devotee maybe, but spirits, ghosts, even we, people raised religiously, don't usually think much about the afterlife. Not as something we are meant to interact with anyway. If such things did exist, and most of us expect them to, we prefer to avoid any sort of encounter with it. Isn't that weird? We hope for an eternal life, but we fear to run into proof of it." "It is in our nature to fear the unknown, Mr. Sampero." Yes, it is. More than that, I might have to say that I hate what I don't understand. And I don't understand what your complaint is. Are you upset because of what you saw scared you?" Fiorentina gave a sip to her glass. I don't know what I saw, Samuel said, his voice flat. We talked about it for hours, me and my mother. Neither one of us could describe exactly what we witnessed. He made a brief pause. On the other hand, we agreed on what we heard, and that you heard it too, I assume. Florentina looked at him. Her expression hardened as if some realization began to unfold. They stared at each other for a moment. What I hear, Mr. Samprero, I always handle with utmost confidentiality. Ignoring her remark, Samuel began pacing around the room. I was 20 when I had him, you know. I named him after my father, Jake. Though he barely knew the man. He loved baseball since he was a kid, and ever since that summer day when I took him to watch the Mariners for the first time, he must have been 5 or 6. I still remember his first game, the way the cap jiggled on his small head. He hit a double that day. He caught a line. Damn, I flinched when I saw the ball flying towards his face. But then he raised his gloves and the ball smacked into the web. Everyone there cheered. I guess most fathers say this, but I mean it when I say he could have made it to the majors. That's how good he was. But instead, he decided to join the family business. Samuel stopped, moving, and threw a piercing stare at this woman. Do you know what business that is, Madame Florentina? Satisfied with that sight, Samuel took a deep breath. Florentina didn't respond, but her tense expression was enough confirmation. Satisfied with that sight, Samuel took a deep breath and relaxed his demeanor. That day, when we were sitting there, he gestured towards the den, and those Scrabble tiles started moving on their own. And then his voice, memories and emotions rippled through his body. The clog in his throat took a moment to pass. Do you remember my mom's expression? Samuel asked. She was sitting next to you. That was joy, Madame Florentina. Joy, not fear. And I bet my face was showing the same. Am I right? I was opposite you. Was it fear that you saw? Hell no. That was my boy talking to me. Why would I fear that? I never expected what happened here. But it happened anyway. There were many things I would have wanted to tell my son. Things I should have said when the knuckles of his fist clenched and turned white, smothering his thrill. Samuel focused just as he did the day he described. But that wasn't what we came for in the first place. As much as I would have liked a father-son chat with my boy, I had something different to ask. So I asked, even with you being present, Mr. Sombrero, all those things you heard, well, you were not supposed to. But I had no choice, had I? You are the medium, the one who's capable of contacting my son, and you did a hell of a job, lady. Why are you here then? What Jake said, his responses to my question. Do you remember them? Of course you do, I know you do. Who could make any sense of those words? The tremors in that voice. He sounded as if he sounded different, confused. I mean, where the ball fell, look up and see the spiders. Quiet or he wakes up. Remember that one, lady? Why don't you just tell me what you want from me? Florentina's voice rose a notch. Ignoring her again, Samuel kept talking, almost to himself. Although I first thought all of this had been a waste of time, there was something bugging me. I mean, hearing the voice of my dead son one more time had been powerful, but wasn't enough. There was something there in his words, something I couldn't let go of. So I kept thinking and thinking day and night until I finally saw it. Stay where you are. Florentina stopped cold after taking 2 steps towards the hall, stabbing her with his eyes. Samuel approached her, just enough to make her understand that she couldn't walk away from this. I finally understood that all the nonsense we heard, the ball, the spiders, He let out a chuckle. We hadn't been there in at least 5 years. Well, apparently he had. Old Travis's house. That man loved Jake. His grandchildren and my son used to play in his huge garden. One day, one of his kids sent the ball under the house into a crawl space full of spiders. As kind and sweet as he was, there was only one thing Travis couldn't take. Someone ruining his nap. Rumors had it since he was shot a man dead because of that. I can believe it too. I mean, he must have already killed 10 people by the time I met him. Probably not because they woke him, but pulling a trigger or jabbing a knife was not a problem for him. I don't think the kids knew any of this. For them, he was just a tender old man who gave them candy. But for sure, they knew he would eat them alive if they woke him. So there goes my Jake, quiet like a mouse. He crawls under the house to get the ball. He crawls into that hole full of spiders in total silence, probably feeling small legs scurrying over his skin and hair, and finds the ball. He comes out from underneath the house without making a noise, so Travis doesn't wake. Florentina inhaled as if she'd been holding her breath, her eyes fixed on him. Brilliant, isn't it? The kid told me that night. He made it sound like a tell. Samuel took a step back. A sudden shade of amusement concealed his face. Who would ever think about that place? Not even old Travis, for sure. He can barely walk nowadays. Most of his time is spent sitting on the couch, being taken care of by an old fat woman, nothing like you, madam. So there I go. I crawl underneath that house, following that old memory guided by the words of my dead son. I'm not big, but definitely bigger than a kid. So you could imagine that moving there isn't easy. I look around and only see spiders. Fuck it, I say after a while of creeping like a snake. This is stupid. So I'm about to crawl back to that small entrance where I saw this spot. Samuel took a sheet of paper out of his jacket's interior pocket. The woman glanced at it, but her attention returned to him after a blink. It's from him, he said. Sir, please I won't bore you with all the details. But he basically explains to me why he did what he did and asks me for my forgiveness. And you know what? I would have forgiven him, for he was my only son. Perhaps I would have given him a little lesson first, but after all, would have been water under the bridge. The problem was, Madame Florentina, that only this note was in that hideous cave, nothing else. Nothing of what this says would be there was. Florentina's expression slowly shifted from perplexity to hesitant realization. Someone, Samuel went on, went to that crawl space before I did and took what belongs to me. Someone who knew where to look. Someone who heard the same babbling my son spat from beyond the grave, and who may have even contacted him again to ask for more precise directions. What do you think, madam? Am I close enough? Am I making some sense? By that moment, Samuel's face had distorted, and anyone would have been able to recognize the animal in him. Mr. Semprero, a tremor clung to Florentina's voice. I have nothing to do with any of what you're saying. When you left, you took the token with you. I wouldn't have been able to talk to your son again without it. And even if these things would have made any sense to me, you can think of me dragging myself into a filthy place like that? Oh, I know. And I've been thinking about that for a while. A fine woman like yourself doing such a dirty job. Unlikely, isn't it? And talking again to Jake? Even if I don't know what you need or not need to do it, I prefer to think you didn't. For since the moments you walked through the door, I could tell you suspected who you were. However, that day, there was someone else in this house. By her reaction, Valentina seemed to have been slapped. I only caught a glimpse of him when I went to your bathroom, Samuel continued. It was my mistake. I opened the wrong door. I never saw him again that night, but in this business, I've learned to trust my gut, to observe, and the fleeting image of what I caught of him was enough to put me on guard. Do you know why? Because of his eyes. Oh, and by your reaction, I can see you understand what I mean. Now tell me, can you see that man crawling under an old house? Call me crazy if you want, but I sure can. Watching the emotion stiffen in the woman's face, Samuel understood that he had hit the mark. For a second, Valentina seemed to shrink, as if the sudden weight of realization was too heavy for her to bear. When she looked up again, there was no trace of defiance in her eyes, just weary resignation. I don't know where he is, she said. Why do you try to protect a man who put you in this situation? I'm not trying to protect him. Some of her radiance seemed to return, melded with anger. He's no friend of mine. He was in your house. He was here for a matter that had nothing to do with you. The Institute asked me to do a personal favor to host him to my previous experience with this case. He was here to investigate. People I respect have him in high esteem, so I agreed. He was supposed to leave that same night, but for some reason he asked me to host him one more day. He wasn't supposed to be here on the day of your session, but he was. What kind of job was he here for? The woman's mouth hung for 2 seconds. Mr. Sombrero, I don't know what else to say. I don't know where that man went. I don't even know his first name. Her eyes didn't lie. Samuel stayed quiet for a moment, thinking of how to achieve his purpose. The people who sent him your way, where do I find them? For the first time, fear was undeniable on Valentina's face. None of this is their fault, she said. They know him and they will know how I can find them. Yes, but listen, all I want is what belongs to me. Tell me what you know and everything will be okay. A brief conflict manifested on the woman's face and died with a sigh. Promise that nothing will happen to any of them or myself, she said. Samuel lowered his gaze as if pondering the offer he had just heard. In reality, he was scanning the body before him. From a distance, he thought, Madame Valentina could have passed for a woman in her 30s. Her unusual set of skills could have shown her the inevitable outcome, but Samuel knew that today she was blind, for the shrewd protecting him was above all that existed. Feeling the heat from the upcoming kill, he smiled. I promise. Standing on top of the bed, Samuel held his prey high. Valentina's legs twitched one last time before going limp. The blue coloration of her face contrasted with the paleness of the rest of her skin. Tied behind her back, her hands had turned purple. Futile struggle had abraded her wrists. Her last breath exhaled. The veins popping on her forehead began to shrink. Samuel's clothes lay on the floor next to the once beautiful black and white summer dress he had ripped from the woman. His muscles bulged as he grasped the fragile neck. The terror in her expression had dispelled, and now she just stared blankly into his eyes. All right, guys, so it looks like he killed her after all, after promising not to hurt her. That was a little strange, but hey, what can you expect from a serial killer or assassin or whatever he was? I guess you'd have to read the book to find out more. Okay, you can go and find this book on Amazon. I did browse through a little bit just now, and yeah, it's got some pretty horrific things in it. I don't know if it's more of a guy book, but it's pretty graphic. Yeah, if you're into horror, you're gonna love this. It is called Thief by Oscar Calderon, and it is on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description below. So hope you guys enjoy it.